Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to our afternoon event, the World Food Crisis Solutions. This is following a two-day event that just happened at Cornell University. Before we get started, I just want to thank the sponsors and donors for this event. So the event was sponsored by the New World Agriculture and Ecology Group, NEWAG at Cornell. It's a graduate student organization that's interdisciplinary, that analyzes the problems of contemporary agriculture and proposes solutions and does activist-oriented work on campus towards that end, as well as JPEC, which is the Committee on Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation at this church. Would you like to give the one-liner for that?
We're started by Bill Gibson, who put environmental justice into the canon of the Presbyterian Church in 1990. We're actively involved in social justice as well as environmental justice, and food is an issue that often comes up.
Great, thanks, Brett. And we'd like to thank Finger Lakes Farmstead Cheese, which is owned by Nancy Tabor Richards, for contributing cheese for free, which was wonderful, as well as Just Desserts and Leslie Mulhern for contributing bread that's really delicious. So thanks to those folks. So we're going to start today's program with, hopefully the polls aren't in the way too much, but three of us from Cornell University are going to try to give a really brief synopsis of a two-day event in 9 minutes. So surely some of the complexity will be left out, but I saw quite a few of you at pieces of this event, and the goal here is to have a slightly different focus. So we're going to bring up and highlight some of the major themes that came out of a conference that was called Visible Warnings. And at that conference, we heard from a truly impressive group of international experts working to change the food system, both within social sciences as well as part of larger social movements. The 2 days of talks provided analysis and critiques of the food crisis, as well as examples of innovation and creativity happening on the ground in places ranging from Mexico to Mozambique. It was a really diverse crowd. So we'll spend a much shorter time here setting the stage, because our goal is to spend the bulk of the afternoon today on discussion and networking and collaboration to brainstorm solutions and action. And this will span spatial scales from our local community to international social movements. We have a representative from Food First with us today. So I'm going to start with a few discussion points on the topic of the food crisis itself. One of the main themes coming out of this conference, a question posed immediately by the person who organized the conference, Phil McMichael, was, should we call this a food crisis, or is it really a crisis of the food system? So what we just experienced, he suggests, is not a blip. This isn't just something that happened in 2007 and 2008, but it's part of a larger historical problem with the industrialization of agriculture. The high food prices of 2007 and 2008 actually followed a longer crisis of low food prices that was caused by neoliberal policies, privatization of the food system, and displacement of smallholder farmers. So we did discuss some of the proximate causes of this most recent food crisis, and those include things like drought and rising meat consumption and speculation on corn futures and the role of agrofuels. But it was pointed out, and I think this might have been pointed out by Eric, that the way these are portrayed in the media is really lacking depth and is presented without recognition of these deeper systemic problems that started maybe with the Green Revolution and the industrialization of agriculture, followed by the neoliberal policies of the 80s and 90s, such as the structural adjustment programs that liberalized trade, opening developing country markets to commodity dumping by the global north, which of course retained its large agricultural subsidies. We heard many reminders at this conference that the food crisis is actually not an agricultural production problem per se, but is a problem of access or a problem of social inequality, meaning that the hungry are too poor to buy the abundant food that is available. So this is, of course, a political problem. A broken link or a disconnect clearly exists between farmers and consumers, and this is exacerbating the food crisis, in addition to the fact that many farmers have lost the ability to produce their own food and have become dependent on imports and are increasingly subject then to the fluctuations of the world markets. And yet, and this was pointed out again and again, the major transnational corporations, the grain traders, agrochemical and seed companies, fertilizer companies, haven't suffered at all yet, and in fact have seen widening profit margins during this whole time because of their monopoly control over the value chain. So as one example, they actually played a role in causing the food crisis by buying grain when the price was low, hoarding it, and then selling again when prices went up. And these transnational corporations are being referred to as crisis winners because they've actually benefited at the same time that many have suffered. So basically, as we all know, as it's currently structured, the food system is not sustainable for the environment or for humans, for social justice. And so after hearing briefly from Allison and Jahi, this panel here is going to offer some examples of projects working to relocalize agricultural production and to increase everyone's access to healthy food. So I'm just going to end my section of this summary on a hopeful note by pointing out that there are immense opportunities in this current moment, we hope, to begin to reshape the world food system by promoting agroecological farming, which might become more attractive to farmers as fuel prices continue to rise. The co-occurrence of the economic crisis could perhaps lead to a stepping back from some of this free trade fundamentalism of the 80s and 90s and recognition that more regulation is needed. And finally, of the many efforts, especially in and around Ithaca, to enhance our capacity to produce and consume food locally. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
So I'll just really briefly, I'm a natural scientist, grad student at Cornell, and so a lot of these things, although I've been involved in New Ag for many years and been reading about this kind of on my own, there were two really big things that I took away from this conference that I was really appreciative of. And I guess I had never understood, you hear about food security, you hear about food sovereignty, you hear about food justice, and I really had been using these terms interchangeably. And something that Raj Patel said during one of the discussions, just an offhand comment that he made, he said, "You're food secure in jail. You're not going to starve to death. If you're in jail, you are food secure because someone's going to bring you food every day." And food sovereignty is the exact opposite of that. It's local democratic control over the production and consumption of food and who has access to it. And so I really walked away with a deep appreciation of what food sovereignty means, and Jahi will go into this in a little more detail, but just how that really is different, and that implies a different approach. Because when we're talking about food security, the approaches that have happened are, okay, well, here we have some extra grain, have some grain, and that's very different than here we're going to support your small farmers and let you make your own decisions. And something else that really struck me about this conference, okay, now I'm going to do this. What was my second one?
Something about development.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever had this conversation. I was like, oh, I don't need this. I don't know if you've ever had this conversation with your colleagues or friends or family members when you try to explain, well, I'm very interested in agroecology and I really want to support small farmers and I want to support small farmers abroad. And I actually had a colleague, another grad student, do what, whenever I talk about this, I get these kind of responses. And the response was, well, what, you want to keep those farmers in poverty? You want to tell them that they can't have a tractor and that they can't develop and they can't have, labor-saving devices and, that's just you imposing your will on the way you want to see the system. And I've never had a good answer for that. I've always been a little cowed by that kind of response of like, oh gosh, well maybe I am, and maybe this isn't what people want, but I know some people who do want it. But coming away from this conference, I also have now a huge appreciation of the massive international grassroots farmer-based social movements that are demanding to keep their small farms, to keep their way of life, but to do it with dignity and democratic control and add food sovereignty. So that definitely, I will now put that in my repertoire of witty comebacks when you get those kind of challenges, when you're expressing your interests to people that may not agree with you. So,
well, building off of what Allison said, food sovereignty, as you alluded to, came from the ground up, came from the people on the ground, the small farmers, especially Via Campesina, which has done a lot to enunciate the goals of food sovereignty and self-determination for farmers, as well as for food consumers in connection with farmers. So one of the interesting things coming out of the conference, as far as for those of us who do research with small farmers, or maybe just our activists or allies, is how to interact with the groups that we're trying to help, especially when we come from the outside, come from a more elite or privileged background. And June Boras, one of the people on the panels yesterday, said basically he views it as sort of a Hippocratic oath, that first we should do no harm. And I see this connected to food security, and we've talked about it, food sovereignty, as we talked about it yesterday, is the fact that if you're a researcher or part of the FAO or some other top-down organization, there's not the democratic structures for the small farmers, the people on the ground, to really feed back and address what they want to get from that. And so the responsibility, I think, of researchers and of these large organizations and as activists is to make these organizations responsive to the people who are actually supposedly helped by it, which is a key part of food sovereignty, or is also one of the other researchers, Tim Lang, talked about food democracy. And when you are someone who comes from outside, also June pointed out, you have sort of a double responsibility. The first is to do no harm, but also when you are that bridge, when you bring it back to the United States, to academic circles, to a different group, that you have to be careful that you're not just extracting knowledge. You're not just using the farmers to learn something that you can use to further your own career, write an article about. You end up being an unelected representative for those people in that world. And so you have to take that responsibility seriously as well, and do what you can to change that system, change it that they don't have any voice in those systems. And then the only other point I wanted to make quickly, it's something that actually Eric went into some detail yesterday, is the necessity, and right now the opportunity with the various crises overlapping, to align different movements that have stakes in this. Definitely we of course think about small farmers. There's a good amount of overlap with natural scientists in terms of agroecology. There could be certainly more, but environment and farming are sort of linked in a lot of people's minds now, but there also is the necessity to align with labor. If we have a vision for a different food system for the United States, say, where we don't have Walmarts, but smaller areas to get food, farmers markets, something like that, we have to make sure that the people who work at Walmart, the labor, is tapped into that and is part of the planning of it, rather than just sort of trying to eliminate a company that is giving people jobs, perhaps jobs of dubious quality, but still jobs. And of course, there are also other conversations about aligning with other important movements like women's rights, which is explicitly part of Via Campesina and a couple other organizations. But one of the other gaps I also see is just farmers in the United States, I think as many of us know, have many of the same problems as farmers abroad. And that's often not recognized. A lot of my colleagues that want to research small farmers go to Latin America or maybe Asia, to go help the little people, but we have people who are being crushed under the system here as well. And so bringing together those movements and realizing what we have in common internationally and within the different movements was another thing to come out of the conference.
Great, thanks. And I think I neglected to introduce myself. My name's Jennifer Gardner, and I'm a graduate student in agroecology at Cornell, as well as a member of the New World Agriculture and Ecology group that I mentioned. So I'm going to just briefly introduce the panelists, and they're not sitting in order, so maybe when I say your name, you could just make a little motion so you know who I'm referring to. And then they're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes to give us an example of projects that they're working on, and these range from within the Ithaca community to working on national level policy advocacy to partnering with international social movements. And don't worry if this seems like a really brief panel, because we'll have a lot more time to interact with these folks later on. And I should also mention, I'll start and tell you as I'm introducing him. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Carl North, and I don't have a formal bio for him. He's graciously stepped in at the very last minute to help us out. We had a different farmer representative lined up for the panel who couldn't make it, and we're so glad that Carl decided to come to this event. So Carl North recently, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but you recently retired from farming at Northland Sheep Dairy. Has a long career as a sheep farmer. His wife Jane made amazing cheese through that business, and they've traveled extensively as farmers around the world, both training other farmers and learning from farmers in collaborative exchanges and bringing that knowledge back to our community. Was a long time member of the Ithaca Farmers Market as well too. Jamila Sekira she has more than 20 years of experience as a community organizer, community service professional, health advocate, and social worker. She also has experience in program development, serving as the first coordinator of the county's homeless youth outreach program and creating an effective outreach program to underserved women for a local health-related agency. She's lived in Tompkins County for 22 of the past 29 years and also brings extensive and trusting relationships and networks to the Whole Community Project. Marie Hall, down there. She's an expert gardener, has led Cornell Cooperative Extension beautification teams for the past 3 years, and has organized community events such as MLK Lunches. A native of the Southside neighborhood, she has extensive social and community organizing relationships that she is leveraging to lead a community and neighborhood Gardens for Humanity effort in partnership with Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell students. She comes to this venture out of a love for gardening with many years of experience and a realized need for ensuring healthy foods reach her community. The community team members consist of a multi-generational group who reside in the south side of downtown Ithaca. Megan Gregory is a graduate student in agroecology at Cornell University. She's involved also with the New World Agriculture and Ecology Group and was really key in spurring this event that is happening today. So maybe actually could we all thank her because she did a ton of the organizing effort. So Megan served as a Peace Corps volunteer in El Salvador for 3.5 years before coming to Cornell. She was working there with communities in agroforestry and soil conservation, vegetable gardening, water and sanitation, health promotion, and education. Since 2003, she's been a member of Bread for the World, which is a citizens movement of people of faith and conscience seeking to end hunger at home and abroad through public policy advocacy. Last June, she participated in a Bread for the World advocacy training for young adults, and since then has engaged those around her in advocacy on issues of agricultural sustainability and social justice. Onmar Pai is a Hubert H. Humphrey Fellow at Cornell University. She is coming to us all the way from Burma and works in the UN World Food Program as a natural consultant of the Food Security Project. Back home, she supports and collaborates with nonprofit organizations, UN agencies, local authorities, and government line departments to initiate dialogue and action planning for livelihood activities. She provides technical advice, technical training, and workshops related to upland agriculture, organic farming, farmer field schools, and community forestry. She also actively participates in a women's health and environmental education program in Burma, as well as for the larger Southeast Asia region. And finally, Eric Holt Jimenez is the Executive Director of Food First, also known as the Institute for Food and Development Policy. Food First's mission is to end the injustices that cause hunger, poverty, and environmental degradation throughout the world. Food First believes that a world free of hunger is possible if farmers and communities take back control of the food systems presently dominated by transnational agri-foods industries. Eric is the author of the recent Food First book, Campesino a Campesino, Voices from Latin America's Farmer-to-Farmer Movement for Sustainable Agriculture, in which he chronicles his involvement with this movement in Mexico and Central America over 2.5 decades. Previously, Eric served as the Latin America Program Manager for the Bank Information Center in Washington, D.C. He earned a PhD in Environmental Studies from University of California at Santa Cruz, and he's taught at the University of California in Berkeley, Santa Cruz, as well as at Boston University. At Food First, Eric's research and writing has concentrated on the global food crisis, the U.S. Farm Bill, the expansion of agri-fuels, fair trade, and neighborhood food systems. His next book, called Food Rebellions, Crisis and the Hunger for Justice, will be released in June of 2009. So thank you very much to all of you for being with us. And the way we had this on the schedule is that we would start at the local level and work up, giving everyone just a brief few minutes to tell us about your projects. But Carl, I should ask you on the spot, is that okay to you to start with you,
Sure.
since you're coming in so last minute? Great, thank you so much.
My really local connection is with Tompkins County Relocalization Project, which is a project that encompasses food relocalization, but a lot of other things too, because they all fit together: transport, housing, other kinds of industry that would provide for basic needs in a much lower energy future. But in terms of food, my interest in that, although it's not necessarily representative of the organic farming movement in New York, which I've been involved in many years, but my interest in that results from what I was trained for was a social scientist, so I've had kind of a finger on power in society for a long time, and I came to the conclusion that whereas in the developing world there's niches, places where people can liberate territory and create a much more sustainable food system, such as the Zapatista Autonomous Community Movement or the landless rural workers movement in Brazil, because of either weaker central control or whatever, or more, I don't know, radical enthusiasm. We seem to be, our enthusiasm seems to have been smashed so many times here in the center of the empire that we had little energy left. So my feeling was that if we were to try to get local control and not try to worry about what central government was doing, then that would be the best place for my energies. And so at the moment in the Tompkins County Relocalization Project, my role is to write a vision of what the food shed could provide as a system for feeding itself. And that encompasses a lot of things. I've broken it down into three parts. Tompkins County being a county that has a 30,000 population central city. What I've learned in Cuba and other places, studying an energy crisis that was very quick in Cuba, but is going to be more gradual here, is that the best place to start refeeding ourselves locally is right in the city. So you have an urban agriculture there that really got up to speed very quickly because it's small neighborhood gardens, backyard gardens, workplace gardens, that kind of thing. The second place is where you have a little bit more room, but you're still close to the center of population, which is the kind of peri-urban or peripheral agriculture. And the third place, of course, is kind of the villages that are still close enough to the center of population to be able to provide some food. So these three places, in my vision, have to have, because of their different circumstances, three different kinds of agriculture, and they can each help each other out. That, in kind of a nutshell, is the kind of vision I want to write about. And we're still at this program, this group, very small group, is still. Does anybody know about this group? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. So this group has been working for several years, and we're at kind of the writing and thinking and eventually spreading of ideas and dialoguing stage with the rest of the community. So I guess it's not surprising that not that many people know about it.
Great, thank you, Carl. And Carl will hopefully join us for the breakout session on local food systems, and maybe we can talk more about that project there. So Jamila, would you like to discuss your project?
Sure. Thank you very much for organizing this, and I'm very delighted to know that it's downtown, because even though it's on a Sunday and I might want to be watching a game or something, I'm here. It's interesting, the whole community project, which is out of the Cornell Cooperative Extension, Tompkins County Youth Association, evolved out of an interest to address childhood obesity. And so there was a great, just a foundation that was laid to move forth in that direction. And what I understand, and I came on board October 2008, so I'm relatively new, is that people recognize that the issue around childhood obesity is really something that's more symptomatic of other things. And so that uncovered what are the real reasons that we're dealing with childhood obesity. Why is this a national crisis? Why is this something that we in Tompkins County and the surrounding areas need to address? And clearly, just to move forward, since we only have a short period of time, and I'm sharing this 5 minutes with my dear friend here, is that we realize that it is the lack of access to food, the food security, for, and words keep changing every day, because now I hear the sovereignty, which now I have to think about that a little bit more. And I'm glad that we're moving on that, but, so what we realize is that the underpinnings to that is, while there are structures in this local economy that, of Tompkins County and Ithaca, that really have addressed issues. There's been food pantries. I mean, the efforts and the energy that goes out in this community is really amazing. I come from Brooklyn, New York. I went back to Long Island. I went to go to graduate school there, and basically you don't see this collective type of work, this energy, and it is something very unusual. For a while I've noticed that, you know, I used to muse at the bumper sticker that said Ithaca is surrounded by 10 square miles surrounded by reality. And unfortunately, I'm sitting here on a Sunday dealing with local and global issues, because the reality is that bumper sticker no longer holds ground. We are definitely being affected by the climatic crisis, all of the different factors that go into addressing our food security or food sovereignty issues. With regards to the whole community project, and then I'll just let Marie speak more on that, is that the whole community project set out to do these various approaches to address childhood obesity, basically address the need for children to have nutritious, healthy foods, and all children to have them, and to have recreation. So in this particular meeting, I'm going to just say that I know we'll have an opportunity later, but some of the things that came out of it, and one that is emerging all around the nation, is community gardens. People getting back into growing their own produce. And we all know that that's much more efficient than going to the supermarket and getting a $2.50 tomato. So what the whole community project is doing is serving sort of as a hub to address issues around food, access to quality food, working with the communities on a real grassroots level to find out what is it that will make you bring your family, your household to a place where having food on the plate is not an issue. And we're not just speaking about food, we have a concern here about the quality of the food. So the whole community project has been, I mean, I can't do it in 2.5 minutes, but it really has blown off the map, and we have so many people in this community who are helping to set up gardens in schools, in neighborhoods. And with that, I'm going to just let Marie speak to that, because what we are working on now, with the gracious help of Megan and Sarah, is what we are calling loosely Gardens for Humanity. And this initiative will hopefully bring more people in the community to the information, the resources to set up gardens and have nutritious food. So here's Marie. Thank you.
Well, what we planned on doing with Gardens for Humanity is to, in my eyes, take a step back in time to where there were victory gardens, to learn not just how to grow, but how to prepare, how to process, how to store different fruits and vegetables. Quite frankly, we really need to do it. Food prices are astronomical, and in order for the children to eat well, and for yourself to eat well, we have to make sure of it ourselves. And teaching others is the way we're going to get it done. And I guess that's all I have to say about the project.
You know, I want to just say that, you know, for a while I struggled with the term sustainability and issues around what that really meant. And what really, really impresses me about the vision of having communities growing their own foods and vegetables is the reality is that then people are not becoming dependent upon a system that we clearly don't always know what's going on and is very fragile and could change in, you know, a matter of months or days. And this also has such an incredible potential in building intergenerational, relationships that have sort of gone by the wayside. Now that I'm becoming involved in this, I grew up in Brooklyn, so I don't know very much about gardening or farming. Forgive me, I just really don't know. But I'm understanding that there is great value in that communal piece of it. So one other thing that I wanted to speak to is that the whole community project is a project that is out of Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County. And what I find very, for lack of better terms, magical about that is that there are various other divisions or of the association that speak to other needs, such as the nutritional need, teaching families how to prepare fresh vegetables, and then there's consumer, helping to make people aware of how they can actually store what they're growing in the garden. So I think there's a lot of potential, not just in the whole community project, but locally that's being done. And that does not even speak to the things that are happening outside of CCE, community supported agriculture, and just a whole host of things. So I hope that I'll get to meet some people to find out more about that and your interest.
Great, thanks to both of you. That was really interesting. And so now we're gonna, of course, these local and regional food systems are nested as part of larger structures and spatial scales. And Megan is going to speak next a little bit about her work with national policy advocacy.
Well, I guess since I've only got about 5 minutes, I decided to whittle down what I wanted to say to two main points that I wanted to make. One is that policies at the national level do have a big influence on food security and food justice and food sovereignty, I think, and agricultural sustainability, both here in the U.S. as well as abroad. And so you may say, oh, okay, sure, yeah, they're important, but what can you do? And so my second point is that I really believe that you, collectively, can influence policy by making your voices heard to your elected officials, but it takes a lot of unity, a lot of persistence, and using all of the different strategies in what we call the advocates toolbox. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. So we've just heard from some folks that are doing really great work at the farm level, at the community level, the real grassroots level here in the U.S. And in a few moments, I think we'll hear about some of those projects internationally. And I really believe that this sort of grassroots community-based work is absolutely essential. This is where people come together. But that said, having worked at the grassroots level, both here in the U.S. as well as abroad, I can say that people on the ground, at least I felt very constrained by a lot of these larger structures that were determining what we could or could not accomplish, what we can and cannot accomplish, and how effective these community-based initiatives can be. And so that was why I really got involved with policy work. So just to give a couple examples, say there's a community organization that's seeking to address a real immediate need of hunger and of poor quality food by improving people's access to and use of WIC, Farmers Market Nutrition Coupons. WIC is Women, Infants, and Children. It's a federal nutrition program. So this organization is going to obviously have a much bigger impact if this program is adequately funded. If there's not resources for this program, it can't happen. And so as citizens and as people that are concerned about food justice, we need to be contacting our legislators during the drafting of Farm Bill legislation, which is when the rules for the federal nutrition programs are set. Who qualifies, who doesn't, who can get access, and who can't. During the budget debates, when authorizing legislation is being passed, so setting a ceiling on how much can be spent on these programs. And then again during the appropriations process, when the rubber really meets the road and they decide how much they're going to allocate. So that's just one domestic example. There's many more. Internationally, U.S. national policies have a huge impact on farmers' ability to grow crops for the people of their country and to sell those at a fair price. Just one example, and an issue that we'll be touching on a little later during the letter writing, we know that global climate change is predicted to have disproportionate impacts on people who are poor, both here in the U.S. as well as abroad. And the impacts abroad are probably going to be pretty serious due to increased drought stress in inland areas, flooding in coastal areas, spread of insect-borne pests. And so policies that determine the level of greenhouse gases that are being emitted right here in the United States are very important in determining if farmers in poor countries, as well as here in the United States, are able to produce sufficient and nutritious food, if the agricultural practices that they've developed over centuries are still going to hold true, and there's already been instances of displacement and of agricultural systems. So that's just one example, but our policies influence a whole host of other things. Our trade policies influence if farmers can sell products in their local markets for a fair price. Our aid policies determine how effective programs are in addressing people's needs. And right now, I guess I feel like that there's a lot, to put it diplomatically, a lot of room for improvement there. So I guess my point there is that national policy matters. And I guess the second thing that I wanted to relate is that I really believe, I guess maybe I'm still 26 and idealistic and naive, but I believe that that we as the citizenry can influence this policy. So just last week, there was $4 million that were proposed to be cut from the international affairs budget for poverty-focused development assistance. And Bread for the World sent out an alert, and many other organizations, I'm sure, as well, I'm sure many other organizations did. And we flooded the office with calls at Senator Schumer's office. When I called, they're like, yeah, we've gotten a lot of calls on this today. And that funding was restored. So that's just one example very recently. Another example of maybe more direct impact, I was at Bread for the World's Lobby Day in 2008. So last year, at the time, I was still a Wisconsin resident. So my senators were Senator Feingold and Senator Cole. And the focus of Bread for the World's campaign that year was on foreign assistance reform. So making this much more accountable to the people that it was supposedly helping, providing ways to make it more efficient, as well as more participatory process. So providing for direct access by community-based organizations, as well as aligning debt and trade and other migration policies with the goal of poverty reduction, because many times those are working against the stated goal of our aid, which is to reduce poverty. So this act that had been introduced, the Global Poverty Act, had already passed the House, and the goal was to gain more co-sponsors for it in the Senate so that it could get brought to the floor for a vote. So Senator Feingold was already a co-sponsor, very supportive, active on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Senator Cole was not yet a co-sponsor. So we went into the lobby visit, me and two other Wisconsin residents, kind of explaining why we believed this was important, why this would have a big impact on people's lives around the world. I related some of my experiences in El Salvador, that our aid was not being responsive to people's needs. It was not funding the things that were most critical to the poorest people, such as water and sanitation infrastructure. It was not being funded at all in Central America. I brought pictures of the people there, and really tried to make the point that these are real people. And so the aide told us, well, Senator Cole is very supportive of these things, but he's on the Appropriations Committee, doesn't like to co-sponsor things because he wants to go in with clean hands, not already committed to any particular initiative to actually appropriate money for it. We continued, articulating, and so we left it at that he was going to talk to the senator. So I got home, we all wrote follow-up letters. I had a letter to the editor in the Kenosha News, thanking Senator Feingold for his co-sponsorship, inviting others to call on Senator Cole to co-sponsor it. I called the aide maybe twice a week, and he kept saying, well, we haven't talked about it yet, we haven't decided yet, we haven't decided yet. And then a couple weeks later, it was a Tuesday morning, and I got a call from the aide saying, there's good news, last Friday we decided to co-sponsor the Global Poverty Act. And that was the first time that I really felt like that, I'd written a ton of letters, but that I'd had a direct impact on an elected official. And so that was really empowering for me. And so I hold on to that. Even though, the financial crisis came, so the act never got brought to the floor for a vote, they've built, Bread for the World and other organizations have built a lot of momentum behind this call for foreign assistance reform, and that is still the focus of their campaign this year, and hopefully we'll get mobilized quickly. So I think I've exceeded my 5 minutes, so I'll be quiet.
Thank you so much, Megan. So Onmar, I believe, was going to speak next about her international work with the UN World Food Program.
Thank you very much for organizing this action conference, and we have discussed a lot through this article yesterday and on Friday how we looking at globally food crisis situation and how we could solve the problem in all possible ways. So we all discuss 2 days. So today we would like to take the action from locally, regionally, and globally. So let's think about world food crisis. And we have economic crisis since 2007, and started from United States and also all over the world. So this economic crisis is really affecting world food crisis. And think about the developing countries, and we are staying under poverty lines. So whenever we think about food crisis, it's pretty much affected to the poor people. So, okay, now food prices are going up, but rich people, they still can afford, and middle class people still can afford. But for poor people, no afford. They can't afford anything. So whenever we talk about food security, the first, we should consider food assets. And second, how to get the availability of food. And third, how to stability of food security. And the fourth one, and the most important thing, is safety. Safety of food security. And our colleagues already discussed at the local level, and healthy food, and how to get the nutritious food in all local level. So I think this is the most important thing. We need to realize globally and internationally how we solve this world food crisis problem. So now I would like to bring up two international program. Two international organization is a very pretty much focused on food issues. So first is Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations, FAO, and second is my organization, United Nations World Food Program, UNWFP. So both organizations are pretty much collaborated each other, as well as with the other UN agencies and non-profit organizations and local governments, and also community-based organization we call CBOs. So this is started from the World Food Summit. The world leader decided to focus on food crisis and food security in 2000, and they made the decision to have 8 Millennium Development Goals. So the first goal is very important for the whole world, and they focus on how to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. So the first organization, FAO, they focus on the first Millennium Development Goal, and to target for like a twin track system. So the first one, okay, how to increase, how to promote agricultural productivity in all levels. And second, how to reduce by half population of people who suffer from hunger. So the FAO is working for 2 twin tracks, and to reach the Millennium Development Goal number 1, and to feed the world. So you may notice their motto is feeding the world and alleviation from the poverty. So I think these two organizations has a pretty much similar mission statement, but a little bit different is the FAO is pretty much focused on technology development, how to enhance the skills, and how to improve the skills in locally, regionally, and internationally. And also, they also working for the fisheries, forestry, biodiversity, research and development. But UNWFP is pretty focused on the food aid activities, like food for education, food for work, and food for livelihood. They try to provide the food in all different ways. It means they try to enhance the locals' livelihood activity by providing the food in all possible ways. So this is the big difference between FAO and the little bit about the FAO target. So they focus to increase farm and rural income, and they encourage to enhance the household food security. So this is also very good. They are doing like that, and small farmers, overall rural and non-farm employment. It means they are helping the world in emergency relief and rehabilitation projects. So, but how they are helping, and they do give the better access to skills, tools, services to young people and to farmers, and also all the community, and to help rural poor making lasting improvement in their own livelihood. Means they want the people, the poor people, depend on self-reliance to have their food and to access the food themselves later on. So this is FAO is doing. But of course, my friend, he mentioned that a top-down approach, and we still have a top-down approach, but sometimes we need to do the top-down approach because of emergency relief projects. It's make us to decide, to decide at once within 24 hours or within 1 hour. But I can say that both organizations looking at the grassroots level. So this is the most valuable thing we can learn from both organizations. FAO is also focused on Millennium Development Goal number 7 to enhance environmental sustainability. It's also like to enhance the biodiversity and to balance with the food system in regionally and globally. And also they are focused on global partnership. This is also very important to look into the food security level internationally, because a partnership between UN agency, a WFP, UNICEF, a WHO, and also like a WTO for the market and trade situation. So they are doing for partnership level. So both organizations, even though if they have no office in one country, they're within the UN agency system, they work within the partnership level. So I would like to talk a little bit about the WFP, what they are doing now. So as I said earlier, they try to improve productivity and prevention further degradation of resource based on their self-reliance of the community. They are also working for emergency rehabilitation and development projects, like cyclones, hurricane, disaster, inhuman activities. So they all work suddenly within the 24 hours. They all working. So comparing two organizations, they try to save lives, to improve nutrition and quality of lives, but all are focused on how to feed the world, how to alleviate our poverty based on the world food crisis situation. So I can say that all the big the big organizations, they are working very hard, but we need to give the voice. We need to give the voice. Without having the community voice, the project cannot be sustainable. And I learned from my 3-year experiences with the World Food Program, we need to give the community to have their own ownership. Because our community got the projects from UNDP or FAO, but without sense of ownership, the project cannot be sustainable. That's why we are working for food security project, but we still need to reflect all the actions and activities. We need to evaluate ourselves, the international organizations, whether we have their community sense of ownership or not. So this is my own experience and what I can tell you for international level. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Irma. And so I think we'll finish up with Eric here, who, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Food First actually works at policy at many scales, including national and international. We'll wrap things up for us.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. Well, listening to all these different experiences, what is Food First Project? this is our project. We try to listen to what's happening on the ground, and we try to amplify the voices of the social movements on the ground that are dealing with the issues of social justice within the food system, because we believe that hunger exists because injustice exists, not because there isn't enough food. We have almost 2 times more than enough food to feed everybody on the planet. Recent studies also show, for example, that organic agriculture could very easily supply the planet's population with all the food it needs at the sufficient caloric levels, even if we were 10 billion or 12 billion. So the problem really isn't lack of food. The problem is lack of access to food-producing resources. And the problem is that too many people are making a lot of money off of food, and it's not the farmers. The farmers get less than 20% of the food dollar, and with that they have to pay their costs, which are increasing all the time. So, when people talk about, oh, organic food is so expensive, we can't afford it. Well, that's true, but the reason why organic food is so expensive, we have to look at the industry in the middle that's just taking the big cut. And yes, food has been cheap for many, many years, and now we've got a big jump in prices. But the fact is that during the last 40 years, a huge industry has developed, the industrial agri-food complex, which is basically eating up all of the profits in the food system and leaving people hungry as a result. 40 years ago, the Global South basically produced a surplus of about $11 billion a year in food. Now it's been reversed and completely inverted. Now there's a deficit. And the reason is that the rules for producing food and for processing food and distributing food and consuming food have changed. The global rules have changed. We've gone through the Green Revolution, the structural adjustment policies, the free trade agreements, the WTO and whatnot, have forced policies on this country and on others, which basically undermine people's capacity to feed themselves and produce their own food, and put all of the power over the food system into just a handful of multinational corporations like ADM, Cargill, Monsanto, Syngenta, who now, with the food crisis, say they're going to solve the problem for us by producing more food and by giving us some GMOs that are supposedly higher yielding, which they're not, by the way. We're told by the WTO and the World Bank that the way out of the crisis now is to ensure that we have liberal markets, when it's liberalized markets which destroyed food production in the Global South to begin with. So I think, when you look at this, like at Food First, we look at this stuff every day. I think it's very depressing. It's very big. And so for me, it's really very important. It's a privilege and it's a necessity to come and meet with people like you. Because you may not know this, but this is where we get our hope. Because you're doing something about this, and you're making the changes on the ground. And what I want to tell you is that you're not alone. You may feel very small compared to Monsanto, Syngenta, or the program for genetic engineering here at Cornell. In fact, you're in the majority. Those of you who are working for justice and who are working to change this food system so that it works for people rather than corporations are in the majority. You are all around the world, and you're doing the right things. I mean, I haven't seen people ask us lots of time, what should we do? Do what you're doing now. You're doing the right thing. You're not doing the wrong thing. The CSAs, the community gardens, the farmers markets, the food policy councils, for example. These are all the right things to do. Keep doing those things. We need you. We desperately, desperately need you. But what we also need is we need to begin to converge all these diverse efforts. We need to find convergence in diversity. And the good news is that this is happening. Sort of systemically we've been divided. But because of our will, we are converging. And we're converging between national and international efforts. We're converging between underserved communities and overserved communities. Right? We're converging between the urban and the rural. And we're converging between advocates and practitioners. And I think this is really very important, particularly this last point on advocates and practitioners. There are some of us who make a lot of phone calls, some of us who run to Washington, some of us who study policy and inform policy and whatnot. And then there are others of us who are on the ground, doing the farming, doing the organizing in the community, educating the youth, working with youth and whatnot, and don't have time to be doing the other, and vice versa. Well, these efforts really have to come together. We've really got to converge. And we call that taking back the places and the spaces. So we have geographical places where we live, where we produce and where we consume our food, where we process our food, where we distribute our food, right? We have to take those places back and put them under democratic control. They're not under democratic control now. Supposedly they're under the control of the free market. That is bunk. There is no free market, and the free market is under the control of the corporations. So we've got to take that back.
Give me an example of taking it back.
Taking it back, for example, would be looking at the food system. Now, first I'll speak about it just generally, but looking at the food system as an engine for local economic development. This is what we need in our communities to bring us together. Why is it that the second largest food retail chain in the world, named Tesco, can come from England all the way over to the United States and invest in my community, which is Oakland, California, which is a very poor community with a lot of problems and no food? We're a food desert. All of the supermarkets moved out, and now everybody gets their food either from fast food joints or from liquor stores. And so we have some of the highest rates of obesity and heart disease in the country as a result. Well, how is it that Tesco can come over and say they're going to open up a store? Poor as we are, we spend $50 million a year on food. That interests Tesco. What if that $50 million stayed in our community? What if we bought the food, not from Tesco, we bought it from the local farmers and from local urban growers as well? What if we had local grocery stores, 3 or 4 or 5 in every neighborhood, right? Rather than having to travel to a Walmart, where the workers in Walmart are on food stamps.
Yeah.
So we're subsidizing Walmart, right, so that they can make a profit and give us lousy food and make us sick. So we have to take that back. And the good news is that we are doing it. And I really encourage these food policy councils, because they're a way of bringing together all these different efforts and beginning to set the rules. That's taking back the spaces, the political spaces where the rules are set, right? So you can set the rules to say, no, we really don't want to provide incentives to bring Tesco into our community. Or Safeway, if you're going to come back in, we have some rules for you. There has to be a community benefits package here. You have to provide some living wage jobs. You've got to buy from local farmers. There's a number of things you've got to do if you want to do business in our community. So that's taking back the spaces. And taking back the places is work where you live. Eat where you live, as much as possible. Obviously, we still need trade. There's nothing wrong with markets. There's nothing wrong with trade. It just depends on who's controlling them and who they're for eventually. So we have one project in which we are incubating a food policy council for Oakland. And we do this in collaboration with a collaborative which we belong to with 60 community organizations and city offices and county offices in Oakland. We have another project, for example, in Africa, in which we're working with farmers' federations. They're huge in Africa. People think Africa is backwards and disorganized. They're much more organized than we are here. Much more organized than we are here. So huge farmer federations with hundreds of farmer organizations within the farmer federations. And we're working with them in order to advance African agroecological alternatives to the food crisis instead of the Green Revolution, which is being forced upon them now by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through a project called Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, which supposedly is going to come in and basically set the stage for the development of the genetic engineered seed industry within Africa, because African farmers may be very poor, but you put them all together, it's a very big market for these seeds. They don't need these seeds. They don't need these seeds. They already have ways of coping with drought. They already have ways of, and it's not just drought. It's the tremendous variability and fluctuations in climate. It's not just that it's going to get hotter and drier. It's just that we don't know what's going to happen. So if you have a GE seeds, which is resistant to a certain kind of drought at a certain moment, that's great if you get that kind of drought. But suppose the drought's too long, or suppose it hits you 2 or 3 times, or it just gets too hot, or it gets too cold, or what if it floods? Those seeds are useless. Whereas these agroecological forms of production reduce the risk in the ecosystem, in the agroecosystem, and can deal with all of these fluctuations, climatic fluctuations. And so the farmers are saying, you didn't even consult us before you came up with this project, which is now being embedded in most of the governments. We have some alternatives, and we want to take them to the table, and we want a discussion, we want a conversation about this. We want to talk about our future. So it's very important to help provide those platforms. So Food First is working to help organize that campaign. And I think it's really the same type of work which is happening here. At the end of the day, it's the democratization of the food system in favor of those who need it most. There's all kinds of democracies, you know, they don't work for everybody. We need to democratize our food system in a way that works for the people who most need it, right? For the underserved. So that's what we do. And, you know, I get very depressed sometimes when I look at what we're up against. But at the same time, I see these, someone said it yesterday, you know, we're like dandelions growing in the cracks of the pavement, splitting it open. I also think we're like, you know, a million cutting edges. It's not just one cutting edge. We don't just have one answer. And they say, oh, what's your alternative? There's not just one alternative to the agri-food system controlled by 5 or 6 corporations. There are thousands and thousands of alternatives. And we have to make the space for all of us. We need that diversity in order to confront the challenges in the future. And so I just want you to know, we go around the world all the time anyway, people. We're growing, we're stronger every day, and I think that this crisis will help to bring us together. I see it already. We shouldn't be deluded into thinking that this crisis is not being seen as an opportunity by Monsanto, Syngenta, Cargill, ADM, and some of the other institutions like CGIAR, which are trying to reinvent themselves, or the World Bank or the IMF, as it's just got a new injection, trying to reinvent themselves to make them relevant, make themselves relevant again. Of course they're going to use this crisis. But we need to use it too, for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Eric. So let's give the panelists all a big round of applause. And I'd like to thank each of you especially for doing an amazing job of sticking to the time limits. We unfortunately started a bit late, so we're running a little bit behind and had hoped to have a longer time for question and answer, but I think I'm going to be a stickler and say we'll have time for 2 questions now, and then you can find these folks later in our discussion sections because it's pretty important that we move on. But I just want to thank you so much for, we moved from this emphasis, a farmer's vision really of relocalization all the way up to these international movements, and your really inspiring words about finding these points of convergence. And I hope we can do some of that later on as we meet together and discuss some of these projects and issues. So does anyone have a burning question that they'd like to ask of someone on the panel now? And it's fine if not, we can also hold them to later. Yes, Steve?
Maybe for Eric, but maybe for anyone else, when you did do this work with food policy councils, advocacy and local action is important, but were there things that happened at maybe a state or a federal level, at least here in the U.S., that provide the space or the framework for that? Like what, in terms of advocacy, where is it important to direct efforts, either for that kind of effort or just for generally increasing food security at a local level? And if there's an international example, that'd be good too.
Well, we're finishing up a study right now on food policy councils, which we're doing. And we did this study because our local food policy council came to us at Food First and says, you know, can you help inform us about the job we're going to be doing? So we did a study of every single food policy council. We've got in the United States and some abroad. We got all the literature We've interviewed everybody. I mean, we've interviewed at least one coordinator, one person from every single food policy council in the United States. And we're in the process of tabulating and analyzing all this information. There's some very sort of emblematic examples of food policy councils which stand out. One is the Toronto Food Policy Council. There's quite a bit. One of the reasons it stands out is because there's so much written about it. And the food policy councils which have failed, you don't have much written about them. You really have to dig to find out, what happened here. But I think that this is a growing trend, and what we're seeing in the research is that they're very site specific in terms of what you do and what you don't do. Do you decide to form the food policy council within local government at the municipal level? Or do you decide to keep it out in an NGO and relates to the government? It really depends on whether your government is dysfunctional or functional, for example. Do you work at the city level, at the state level? There are food policy councils at city, at county, and at state levels. And so, I mean, it just really depends. One thing which seems absolutely clear is that you need some resources. You just can't move forward on the basis of volunteers. You need at least a paid position, right? You've got to get a paid position in there, and then everybody else can chip in. But you need somebody who can consistently be there every day working the council, right? And there's just, I think there are different challenges within every community. And the makeup of the council has to reflect those challenges, those demographies. In Oakland, for example, all the rich people live up on the hills, all the poor people live on the flats. We have the food deserts in the flats. We have, the slow food folks voting with their forks up on the hill. We're still both in Oakland. We both need to be on that council. But we have to understand where are the primary problems with our food system in Oakland. They're in the flats, they're not in the hills. But we need people of goodwill in the hills to work with us on the flats. We need business on the council, because we're about business. We're about keeping the food dollar in the community. That means business. It's not just all about NGOs. So our report should be out by end of July, and you can make it. It's probably going to be called Food Policy Council's Lessons Learned. If you go to our website, we've got two other pieces of literature just came up. Two other research pieces just came up on the website last week. One is on. We compared Tesco with People's Grocery. Two very different proposals for providing food in our community. And there's another one on food system assessments, which are a very good thing to do prior to doing the Food Policy Council. And we looked at all the food system assessments done in the Bay Area. There were 50 done in the Bay Area. And we found out what do they tell us and what don't they tell us. What do we still need to know? So.
I'm just going to take one more, and you had your hand up before, Christine.
Well, it's not a question, you actually answered all the questions I had yesterday, and if we're talking about doing both the assessment and a council here, so if you want to sign up over there, stay in touch with that, please.
Great. Okay, so one more question. There was someone with a hand up over here. Yes.
This is for Carl, because we're talking a lot about trying to bridge sort of the policy, government, business, farmer, like top down, down to up, and I was wondering, since you said it was sort of more efficient, or I don't know if you would say efficient, to focus on grassroots and just ignore the central government, if you have had any experience, like sort of as a farmer with a farm, talking to governments, and if it's been effective, or if you would have some sort of ideal way to set that up in a food policy council where the farmer actually gets the say, and it's not all talking about like sort of the theory and the politics and the government, where the structures are so powerful, as we've been talking about. The policy is, the advocacy in policy is crucial, but you also need to represent the farmers' issues, and actually getting the voice heard. Has that been difficult in circles like policy councils and governments and things like that?
Even at a local level, as a producer, primarily retailing at the Ithaca Farmers Market, we can't even get the local government to provide us with a space, which in many other cities around the world is provided by the local government for So it's that kind of thing. One of the incarnations of kind of this, what we're trying to do in Tompkins County is called the Transition Town Movement. And that's an international kind of nascent effort where people are sharing information on at many different levels, how to affect policy all the way down to how to start a guerrilla garden. And so it's kind of a everything in all the eggs in the basket kind of approach. But the central kind of unifying premise is what I mentioned before, that there's going to be an energy descent, that is to say a future with much less energy, and all aspects of life in a community will have to change radically.
Yeah.
And the transition town presents that not as some kind of Armageddon, but as an opportunity, because if industrial agriculture is incredibly energy expensive, that means it's going to go out of business eventually. It's just going to disappear. So that means that all that powerful superstructure that is benefiting from industrial agriculture, not so much the farmers, but the input suppliers and the output buyers, the John Deeres and the car supplying inputs and the DuPont supplying inputs and the Cargills and the Sara Lees controlling the output and controlling prices that way. But that means that if eventually that's going to disappear, the only question for us and for the Transition Towns movement is, do we wait for it to happen or do we try to make it a softer landing by changing the whole structure of business? And I really like what Eric said about what's sometimes called the multiplier effect, where the food economy of a community becomes the driver for the whole economy through the multiplier effect. This actually happened to bring one of the reasons it is mentioned for bringing the United States out of the third depression in the 30s, and I think we're going to have the same thing, is that there were such a thing as parity, which was to create a price level that was economical for farmers to produce at for their products, and that had a multiplier effect nationally to restart the whole economy. The other thing was, of course, the Second World War, which in the military-industrial complex got everybody working for that. But the idea of parity that lasted really only until the early 50s apparently had a major effect on restarting the economy after the Great Depression. So if you're interested, look up on the internet the Transition Towns.
Great. Thank you, Carla. Can we thank everyone one more time?
Yeah.
So I forgot to announce early on that if you step out into the hallway, it's pretty clear where the restrooms are. There are labels if you need to use them, and there will be a minute in a moment to grab some snacks if you'd like as we transition to the next thing. But I'd like to invite Megan up here to explain the structure of the next activity, just so everyone's on the same page before we all get up and move around.
Great, thanks. So in the spirit of sort of what was discussed, we're going to continue the rest of our time having as democratic as possible discussions. And so Jen and a few of others of us were involved in a Sustainable Agriculture Education Conference here at Cornell last summer, where we felt 2 years ago, sorry. Correct me. And we really tried to design the conference to reflect how we thought democratic learning might happen. And so we're going to use one of those tools today, which is called affinity diagramming, to structure our discussion for the rest of the afternoon. And the way this is going to work, I'm going to describe it briefly. And our goal is to be back as one large group to summarize by 4:15.
We might have to push that back a little bit. We could say 4:30 and do 5 to 10 minute summary and still have 20 or more minutes for letter writing.
Okay. So the way this is going to work is we're going to let you self-select into 3 groups. We have sort of defined 3 broad questions in advance. One is dealing with local.
I don't have the question.
Yeah. One is dealing with, and these are geared towards what actions can we take, what can we do. And so one is going to be what can we do on the local level to develop more sustainable food systems and food sovereignty. One is going to be more looking at the national level, what can we do in terms of policy, but also possibly networks, other mechanisms to change food systems. And one is going to be looking more at the international scope in terms of how both as U.S. citizens and international people from other countries as well, how can we work together to develop more sustainable global food systems as well? Does that sort of capture? The questions are worded more specifically. So we're going to ask you to each choose one of those three categories. Each group is going to have a couple of facilitators, and our panelists will hopefully be joining the groups, so they will be participating. And the whole idea is that every person in this room has something to contribute, and this is a way to hopefully get everyone's ideas integrated into the discussion, but do it effectively and efficiently. And so once you're in your groups, there's going to be about a 5 to 10 minute brainstorming session, and there'll be somebody writing down all those ideas. At the end of that time, we cut up the paper that has each individual idea up, and as a group, silently, you are not allowed to speak at all during the second part. The pieces of paper are taken with the different brainstormed ideas, and each group will have an area of the room to work in. You will organize those ideas, and it's called affinity diagramming because you're grouping like with like. So you're going to put, someone has something about urban gardening and somebody else has something about, urban food system justice or whatever. Possibly those will be grouped together or something. But there's no talking. You can put things up where you see fit. If somebody disagrees, you don't say anything, but you're allowed to move them to another group, for example. And so that goes on for about 5 or 10 minutes until hopefully the ideas will sort of fall into some subcategories. And that's what creates the agenda for the discussion. So then at the end of those groupings, we'll take just a couple minutes to title the subgroups. And those will be the agenda items that will be the discussion then. So that way, hopefully, everyone contributes to setting the agenda. And then after that's done, then everybody gets to talk and share your ideas. And I think that's most of it. And then at the end, there will be a note taker throughout. At the end, we're hoping that one representative from each group will come forward and summarize what your group came up with so we can integrate a little bit across the different groups.